Are resale platforms trying to dictate how you need to run your small business? Hi, my name is Laura, and I sell women's vintage clothing on sites like Etsy, eBay, Depop, and whatnot. And today I'd like to talk about whether or not sellers are losing the autonomy to run their businesses in the way that suits them best. Before I get into all that, I want to acknowledge the fact that I am reading from a script today. I can go on tangents a lot. So I'm just trying to keep myself on track. I want to be authentic with everyone, but I also want to make sure that I'm not going too far off topic, which I definitely have a tendency to do. So, to start off, I think it's important to acknowledge that these platforms essentially have two different types of customers. They have the buyers, which we normally think of when we talk about customers. And obviously, these are the people that are coming to them trying to find a product or service, but they want to make sure as a buyer that they are protected in that transaction, that they are providing their money to a seller that like actually exists and will provide the promised service or product, right? As sellers, though, we are also customers for these platforms. We pay fees to Etsy, eBay, etc., and we expect certain services in return. With that in mind, there are obviously going to be some areas where these platforms do have hard and fast rules about what is required. That's generally going to be things, that comply with state and federal regulations. It's going to be things like if you're listing an item for sale, you actually have to accurately describe it. You actually have to send it to your buyer. These are all, no-brainer type of things, right? But there are some factors that I hear sellers talk about a lot where they feel as though these websites, these platforms are trying to force them into a certain course of action. But in reality, these platforms are just making recommendations for how you may run your business in a way that gets you more sales. Some of the biggest areas that I hear complaints about are returns, shipping, free shipping, low cost shipping, photo formats, and seller badge programs like top seller on eBay or star seller on Etsy. So, in most of these cases, these platforms aren't trying to dictate a specific rule to you. They are coming to you with information that's been garnered through various types of research, whether their own or industry experts, on what a very generic general customer is looking for. So, most customers want XYZ when they are shopping online. This is obviously never going to apply to every buyer on every platform for every type of product or service. These are just very generic, general rules or guidelines. I'm going to focus today mostly on Etsy, eBay, Depop, and whatnot, because that's where my experience is. But this applies to all sorts of platforms, Poshmark and Mercari, Grailed, Vestiaire. There's tons of platforms. They're all going to be a little bit different. So just keep that in mind as I go through my examples. I'm going to start off talking about returns. Returns are always a hot topic. A lot of sellers feel as though these platforms force them to take returns. Again, there are going to be some instances in which, yes, you may be forced to take a return. If I list a pair of jeans for sale, someone buys them and I send out a sweater, I have not provided what the customer wants. I'm obviously going to be forced to take a return or to refund money to this buyer. Similarly, if I list a pair of jeans for sale and the zipper just doesn't work, they're not a usable item to this buyer if I haven't disclosed that information and they bought it assuming that they're buying a pair of jeans with a working zipper. So there are some scenarios in which, yes, you're going to be forced to take a return. There are also some scenarios in which, yes, you may be forced to take a return if a platform decides that the buyer is in the right and you are in the wrong. And maybe you don't agree with that. But in my experience, those instances are pretty few and far between. I think that we hear a lot of complaints about that. But I think that the ratio of how frequently that's actually happening is a lot lower. So, do these platforms force you to take returns? There are some platforms like Poshmark and Mercari specifically that actually have very short windows of time where a buyer can raise a concern, and sellers love these platforms kind of for those reasons, at least in part. um, Mercari and Poshmark, I believe both of them offer a 3-day window where a buyer can raise some sort of concern. This doesn't mean that the return is going to be accepted, but it does say you've got 3 days to let us know if there was any kind of issue with this item. And they generally don't allow returns for things like buyer's remorse, meaning, I just don't like the color or I don't like the way this item fits. So you have to have an actual like item not as described type of situation in order for the return to be approved. Um, but a lot of other platforms, Etsy and eBay in particular, are the ones I'm going to talk about. They allow the sellers to set their own return policies. eBay does have a few more guidelines. There are certain categories where you need to provide at least X amount of time if you're going to accept returns, like a 14-day or 30-day return policy, but they do allow you to refuse returns. And they do offer you options. You could do up to like 60 days of returns, etc. Etsy is a little bit more non-specific as far as what their sort of recommended return policy guidelines are. They don't quite map it out for you as much as eBay, but they do sort of say, do you accept returns or not? And they have sort of a scripted guideline that they'll populate in there for you if you decide that you do accept returns. So obviously, as a buyer, we all like the option of being able to return an item. So when these platforms, Etsy, eBay, et cetera, say, oh, we're going to rank you higher in search if you offer returns or offer free returns even, that's not the platform saying you must offer returns. That is the platform saying that, hey, if you offer this service, we're going to give you a little bit of a boost in search when you do that, right? For some reason, a lot of sellers interpret this as like a directive, and it's not. It's just a suggestion, and it's not a punishment if you don't offer returns. You're not being punished. It's that the people who do offer returns are getting a little bit of a boost or a little bit of a reward, right? Because they're offering something that buyers are looking for. Now, that's not to say that it's a good idea for you to offer returns. Maybe it's not. There are a lot of circumstances under which returns are not advantageous for a seller to offer. And I can't really tell you all of those. For me, I offer returns. I don't get very many of them. It's incredibly infrequent. And when I do have returns from buyers, it usually does tend to be a buyer's remorse type of situation. The Everything goes really smoothly. I think I've had one or two instances in 10 years of selling where I felt like a buyer was kind of scamming me or taking advantage of a situation. So, but that's me. I think that it can vary depending on the types of items that you're selling. And now I'm going off on a tangent, so I'm going to back that up a little bit. Okay, so but obviously buyers want to be able to return items. That doesn't mean that you have to offer returns. And if a platform is offering to boost you in search, that doesn't mean that you not accepting returns is going to like make you disappear from search altogether. Another example of this is shipping costs. So shipping costs are such a weird thing. For years, it's been pounded into our heads that buyers like free shipping. And we all know that this was driven pretty strongly by Amazon Prime and their free shipping. But this is another area where your decision whether or not to offer free shipping is going to vary greatly depending on what you're selling, who you're selling it to, etc. Obviously, when given an option, buyers are always going to choose the no shipping, the free shipping option, right? I'm going to choose that. You're probably going to choose it. But buyers also understand that free shipping really is not free shipping. If you see a $3 item on Amazon that has free shipping, you're a little suspicious, right? I know that I am. Buyers know that the cost is built in somewhere, but there is a very real psychological phenomenon where the first price that a buyer sees, which they refer to as the anchor price, is kind of a price that the brain sort of says, okay, this is reasonable or unreasonable. If the brain has decided this is a reasonable cost, anything above that sort of makes us take a step back and go, oh, wait a second, now you're adding something on. And the acceptability of the amount being added on is often in direct proportion to the item cost itself, right? If you have a $5 item, and it's $1 shipping, you might be like, okay, that's annoying, but whatever. If it's $5 shipping, well, now you've doubled the cost. If it's $15 shipping, now you're like, well, this is ridiculous. Even if it's not ridiculous, if it really is realistic that, you know, maybe I'm trying to sell an anvil for $5 and the shipping cost is going to be $25 because anvils are heavy, right? So it makes sense, but somebody who's looking at a $5 item that now has jumped to $30, it's upsetting. Some buyers don't really think that far into it. They look at the price and they don't consider how much shipping really is. They're just taking everything at face value and going, woohoo, free shipping. Other buyers are completely aware that, like, I know that this $90 item is sort of covering up the cost of shipping. That if the shipping were not included, maybe this item would cost $75. But I like the fact that I don't have to think about this. I don't have to do extra math. I don't have to be surprised. I'm one of those buyers. I like free shipping because the first price I see, I'm like, okay. And then I get to my cart and now I've got tax and shipping and what else. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that now, right? Additionally, another factor is, of course, if it's a $5 item or a $25 item or a $300 item. Okay, if I see a $300 item and the shipping is $10, I'm not going to think as deep into it. I'm going to be like, okay, if I see a $5 item and the shipping is $10, I'm going to take a step back from that. So in instances like that, maybe you're going to look at that and decide, well, I can't offer free shipping on $5 items, but what I can do is say, if you buy $35 worth of items, I will then include shipping in the cost or offer free shipping. And that's, a format that Etsy has made it pretty easy to utilize. And it's a really good sales tactic for some things, right? In some cases, having a free shipping threshold will encourage buyers to purchase more. You know, Personally, I don't feel like that works out necessarily for my inventory, but I am also often selling items that are 40, 70, $150. And so people may not feel comfortable reaching $100 free shipping threshold. Maybe they'd rather just pay $40 plus $10 shipping. So additionally, there's items like, furniture. Obviously, a hand carved chair is probably not going to include free shipping. I have never tried to ship furniture. I don't know what it costs. I do know that if I'm shipping, let's say, a blouse, I live in New Jersey, so it's pretty easy for me to look at the variance in shipping costs, because shipping something from New Jersey to New York is a lot different than shipping it from New Jersey to California when it comes to costs. So I know that a blouse, maybe it's going to cost me $5 to ship it to New York, maybe $6 to California. So building that price into my item cost is not really a big deal. But if I have something like a set of Pyrex bowls, right? It's going to cost me about $7 to ship that from New Jersey to New York, but it's going to cost me about $14 to ship that from New Jersey to California. If the bowls themselves only cost $25 and I'm adding 7 versus 14 onto that, that can be a big difference. If the bowls cost $250, the buyer may not care about another $14. Back in the day before grounded vantage was an option and anything over a pound had to be shipped priority, the difference in shipping was really huge. Like shipping to New York would have been like $8 versus shipping to California would have been 24. So in an instance like that, I may not want to build the shipping cost into the item cost, because the buyer is able to look at other sellers selling a similar item. Things like a set of Pyrex bowls, there's probably more than one available. And if a California buyer is able to find a seller that's located in Washington state versus New Jersey, that may be a better value for them, right? So there are times that including shipping in the cost of your item is not necessarily going to work for you. Again, using like a chair as an example, I have no idea how much that costs, but if a bowl can cost, $7 or $15, then I'm sure that chairs are a whole lot of money. And it's very hard to figure out. When I factor shipping costs into my item price, I always base it on, what if I was shipping this item to California? That's my default. I'm in New Jersey. It's pretty easy to do. If you live in the middle of the country, maybe it's easy for you to include the shipping cost into your Pyrex bowls, because it's going to be pretty similar regardless where you're shipping to. That's not the case for me, and I have to take that into account. And the same thing for people who are selling things like very big and heavy items or very small, low dollar items. You have to look at what works well for your business. And also, what is your competition doing? Other furniture sellers are probably not including shipping in the cost of their items either because it's not realistic to do that. Other clothing sellers, they may be doing it. The clothing that I'm selling, honestly, me selling vintage clothing also makes a big difference. If I'm selling modern free people items, there's going to be, hundreds of other sellers that have the exact same item that I do, and I have to be in line with those costs. If I'm selling vintage items, it's unlikely that other sellers are going to have the same exact thing that I have. And so honestly, the cost of my item itself can be $40 or $100, and I can kind of make it up. So sticking my shipping in there is not going to be as big a deal. Look at your competition, look at the various prices, California versus New Jersey, for example, and figure out what's going to work best for you. If you do not offer free shipping and the platform says, well, we're going to prioritize free shipping in search, that doesn't mean that you're just not showing up in search. I'm going to move on to, oh my God, I have all these notes and it just, anyway, I'm sure it still helped me to write them, to be honest. But all right, let's talk about photo formats. So this has been a big deal for years on a lot of different platforms, but most recently there's been a little bit of an uproar because Etsy started showing people on their dashboard this little message that says, oh, these factors may risk lowering your visibility in search. And for me, the factors that are risking my search ranking visibility are all photo related. So let me see, collage photos, low resolution photos, and photos that are too dark. Sellers have seen these messages and sort of flipped out and going, oh my God, Etsy is making me jump through hoops and they want me to change all of my photos on their website. And that's not what's happening. What is happening is Etsy is saying, hey, we know that XYZ are factors that influence buyers clicking on your listings. We've noticed this through research, we've noticed this through buyer activity, and we're letting you know what we've seen. We're sharing this knowledge with you, and we recommend that you take these steps to improve your visibility in search. They're not saying if you don't do this, we're going to hide you. That's not what's being said. So, for example, dark photos. Obviously, if a photo is really poorly lit and it's hard to see what the item is, a buyer's going to look at that and go, I don't want to do that, especially when you're looking at it in a sea of little thumbnails. So you search on any page and it's all little tiny photos. And those tiny photos have to be engaging enough for your buyer to go, I wonder what that is. So you have some dark, grainy photo, the buyer's going to be like, I'm not doing that, right? It also just makes you as a seller look inexperienced and unreliable. They want clear photos that give a good idea of what they're going to be getting. Um, Low resolution photos, kind of the same thing. You don't want it looking sort of pixely. It's not going to show up great. Collage photos, I don't want to say I have feelings about those, but personally, I've used collage photos when I feel like a single view of an item is not the best representation of an item for a buyer. So, for example, I sometimes will sell 2 or 3 piece sets of items. And so I will do a side by side. Let's say one with the nightgown and one with the robe over the nightgown. So my concern is if they just see the nightgown, they don't realize that there's 2 pieces. If they just see the robe over the nightgown, the robe kind of camouflages the nightgown and it just looks like I'm selling a robe. So I do a side by side. Now, Etsy is saying, hey, collage photos may not be great for visibility. So what I may decide to do is in that instance, I can fix it. I can put the nightgown on with the robe over it, but maybe I have the robe sort of falling off one shoulder and, so they can see it's a 2-piece set. But another example, I have a swimsuit on my Etsy shop that is phenomenal. It is an absolute showstopper. It's basically backless and it's a super low plunging front neckline. Now, in my opinion, the combination of these two things together are what make it a real showstopper. Does it have the plunging neckline alone? Is that awesome? Yes. Is the backlessness awesome? Yes. But I want to showcase both of those together. So that particular item, I would probably still choose to do a collage photo. The concern that Etsy has is that collage photos start looking a little bit messy. There's too much going on. And I understand that, but that's also very dependent on a lot of other factors about the photo. For many years, we've heard different platforms talking about plain white backgrounds, right? So there's a couple reasons for this. Number one, obviously, the less you have going on, the more it showcases the individual item that you're selling. And that doesn't matter if it's a phone charger or a piece of jewelry or a dress or a bowl, whatever it is. These platforms are telling us plain white backgrounds are what the algorithm is looking for. That makes a lot more sense to me as AI has come more into the picture, because we also know that in addition to keywords being factored in when search results are presented, um, photos are playing heavily in it as well. AI is looking at what's in this photo and is it similar to other types of items? You know, when you do a Google image search, this is all coming into play. And so I understand a little bit more even the importance of that. For me personally, I take my photos in this exact corner that I'm sitting in. So I have all of this wall art going on, and that may be seen as a bad thing for Google image search. However, it once again depends on what are you selling and who's your demographic. So if you're selling super generic stuff that hundreds of other sellers are offering, yeah, maybe you just want to put it in a plain white background. As a vintage clothing seller, a lot of my buyers, a lot of any buyers for vintage clothing are also sort of looking to know that they are buying, they want to build a relationship with the seller, or at least know that this seller is an individual person. They're buying, you know, the seller's personal style and things like that. A lot of that comes into play. I know that when I look at other sellers on social media and different platforms, I'm attracted to a lot of the ones that have a more playful background or something that sort of it's like branding in a sense. Anybody finding my images online knows exactly who I am if they're familiar with me. I'm not fooling myself that like I'm not like famous, obviously, but if they're familiar with me and they find one of my images on Google, they're going to know, oh, hey, that's that seller I follow on Etsy. And I have sellers that I follow like that on Instagram and Etsy, etc. And it's a form of branding for them. And it also makes me feel like I know them. It makes me feel more connected to them. It makes me feel like their personal style is sort of vibing with my personal style. I like that. I prefer it over just a stark white background, you know, with an item laid out flat. That's not necessarily going to be the best course of action for everyone. Again, it depends on what you're selling and who you're trying to sell it to. So when these platforms are making recommendations about photos, they are again drawing from an incredibly broad base of buyers buying an incredibly broad array of things: cars, keychains, dishes, vacuum cleaners, clothing, everything, right? They're looking at all of these buyer behaviors and saying, buyers across the board want this. But as you narrow things down, you're going to find more differences. So, you know, take it for what it is, as just sort of one recommendation in a sea of other recommendations that will help you to be able to present your product to a buyer. Okay. Let's see. Wow, I ramble in writing as much as I ramble in speaking, but that's okay. All right. Finally, I want to talk about some of the seller badges: top seller, top rated seller, star seller, etc. These programs generally use a set of criteria that, if a seller meets them, the platform will highlight the seller in some way. Maybe you get ranked higher in search. Maybe you get a little star next to your name. You get a little pat on the back, etc. Right? Sellers seem to see these as, once again, requirements. They treat them as though the platform is forcing the seller to engage in certain behaviors in order to sell on the platform at all. And that's, again, not what's happening. The idea is that these platforms are trying to show to buyers, hey, look, this seller over here goes the extra mile in all of these ways. And so we'd like to highlight them for you. Now, they're not saying, oh, this seller doesn't do that, so they're a piece of crap and we're going to not let you know that they exist. That's not what's happening. And a lot of sellers feel like, well, it's unfair. If I can't respond to a message in 24 hours, I get penalized. And that's not really the same thing as the platform saying, hey, this seller consistently answers messages in less than 24 hours. So we are going to point that out to the buyers, right? It's not penalizing sellers, it's rewarding sellers. And some people don't see the difference there. But the fact of the matter is that buyers like quick responses. Buyers like quick shipping. They like free shipping. They like having the option to return. These are all things that buyers value. And these platforms are saying, hey, these sellers offer all of those things to you. So we would like to showcase for you, the buyer, these sellers are going to give you the experience that you value. If you are a seller that does not offer returns, for example, and therefore you're not able to get eBay's top seller badge, that doesn't mean that eBay is going to hide you forever. That doesn't mean that sellers won't buy from buyers won't purchase from you. That just means that eBay has recognized that sellers are looking for, oh my gosh, eBay has recognized that buyers are looking for a certain experience and these sellers are willing to provide that. Okay. There could be a seller that gets that top seller badge and they're a piece of crap. I mean, I see all the time these toxic sellers spewing negativity about eBay, about buyers constantly. And it's a numbers game to them. If you are making 73,000 sales a month and you have buyers that are having negative experiences, those negative experiences may get buried by the rest of the buyers who had very mediocre experiences that are fine. Again, a shop that's selling, I always go to phone chargers as my generic example. I don't know why, whatever. But a shop that's selling like iPhone chargers, right? Your customer experience did, I bought the charger, I got the charger, it works great, right? It's a very different type of feedback than, for example, somebody who's buying something from me where a more personal connection is perhaps sought or at least appreciated. So if your platform is saying, oh well, if you want to get an A+ grade, you have to do these things. It's not saying that you're forced to do those things. It's just saying if you don't, maybe we're going to give you a grade of B, and a B is a perfectly acceptable grade. The same thing with reviews. People get very upset if they don't get 5-star reviews, which is understandable because it has a big impact on our shops. But there's this weird expectation now that if it's not 5 stars, then it's awful. 4-star review is 4 out of 5 stars review. It's a very good score, right? But we get this like, oh, well, you're punishing me for some reason. I'm not punishing you. I just, you know, maybe some buyers consider 5 stars to be above and beyond. And the seller didn't go above and beyond, but it was a perfectly acceptable experience. And I would return again because nothing bad happened. So, um, you know, essentially, it's up to every seller to look at the factors that these platforms are recommending and determine whether or not it's something that works for you and your business. Um, None of these factors individually are going to shoot you to the top or sink you to the bottom, right? Every time a buyer engages in a search, multiple things are being considered. My God, I'm sorry. Number one, I should edit that out, but let me again, I'm not doing editing right now. I'm so sorry. Anyway, um, when a buyer is presented with options, the things that are considered in that search are obviously the keywords that the buyer has entered. But also, I mean, there's so many things like, yes, free shipping, and especially if the buyer filters for it, but also things like size, if you're talking about clothing. Things like, are the photos clear? Yes, that's going to factor in. Is the description all filled out? Did you use the full number of photos that you could use? Did you fill out all the little item drop down item descriptors? I went way off the rails here. I was doing so well for such a long time. Multiple things are going to factor into your placement in search. It's not coming down to just free shipping and returns. It's all of these different factors. And a lot of the times they're very buyer specific factors that you don't have any control over. Etsy is going to recognize, like, oh, Laura usually looks for things that are like this. So when she's looking for vintage pants, we're going to give her these other options that kind of fit with the other things that she's looked for in the past. All of those things factor in. What competition do you have? How many people have paid for promoted ads? How closely does your item description match what the buyer is searching for? Did the buyer just search pants, or did the buyer search for 1970s high-waisted denim pants with a tapered leg, right? There's a lot of factors. So you not offering free shipping is not tanking you. It's just one small factor in a wide array of considerations. So at the end of the day, you definitely have a lot more autonomy over the way that you run your business than these fear mongers would lead you to believe. And keep in mind that sometimes the fear monger is up here, right? We are our own fear mongers, especially if you are a people pleaser, if you're a high achiever, you're always striving for that A plus, and that's you putting that pressure on yourself. The platforms are going to say, hey, these are things that work well for most people most of the time. Does not necessarily even mean it's going to work well for you. So keep all of that in mind. Are the platforms really making you jump through hoops, or are you making yourself jump through hoops based on the recommendations that the platforms have made? And I'm going to say, if you're one of those people who feels like, you know, you're being forced to offer free shipping, I'm not criticizing you at all, right? I'm making a recommendation that maybe it does not play as strong a factor as you fear it does, and you can be a little bit easier on yourself. One of the things that I've found super helpful is there's a couple of YouTube channels that I love watching, and this is not me promoting anything necessarily, but I'll try and drop them in. But I've watched so many videos that talk about SEO and search, mostly specific to Etsy, but they've been really helpful to me. I've watched many of them over a long period of time. All of this information sort of builds up in my head over time. So this is not like a go watch this one video and you'll have all the answers. That's not how it works, unfortunately, for anything. But, it is stuff that I've become comfortable with over a long period of time. And yeah, just remember there's no like single, you know, magic bullet solution to, you making instant sales overnight. Anyway, I hope that all of that was helpful. I really appreciate you watching. I hope you found some value in this. I'm sorry for my rambling and or lack of editing. Um, if there are other topics that you would like to see me cover, let me know and maybe I'll try and go over them and I'll try and be succinct. Probably not going to happen, but I'll give it a shot. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it and I hope I will see you again soon.